In his poem, The Faded Flower, Samuel Taylor Coleridge uses caesura, meter, and personification to turn a simple flower into a scene of drama, illustrating the imagination as a second witness. Let's give it to the GOAT for the reading. Ungrateful he who plucked thee from thy stalk, poor faded flower on his careless way, inhaled awhile thy odors on his walk, then onward passed and left thee to decay. Ah, melancholy emblem, had I seen thy modest beauties dewed with evening's gem, I had not rudely cropped thy parent stem, but left thee blushing mid the enlivened green. And now I bend me o'er thy withered bloom, and drop the tear as fancy at my side. Deep sighing points the fair frail Abra's tomb, like thine, sad flower, was that poor wanderer's pride. Oh, lost to love and truth, whose selfish joy tasted her vernal sweets, but tasted to destroy. Now at a glance, this is a classic Shakespearean sonnet. There's 14 lines, divided up into three quatrains and an ending couplet. Now, one difference between this and a traditional Shakespearean sonnet is the change of rhyme scheme. In the second quatrain, instead of going the normal route of C, D, C, D, instead Coleridge uses C, D, D, C. Now, after some research, I found that Coleridge was actually experimenting with styles of poem, and I will not be going into this more today, mostly because there's a lot more to dig into with the rest of this poem. But for now, I'm going to split it up into its different sections and analyze it from there. All right, first quatrain. Now, I believe that the most powerful, most important words in this first couple of lines is the first two, ungrateful he. Now, to start it off, ungrateful is a trochaic word in a normally iambic type of style and a mostly iambic poem. This disruption causes kind of like a pause, a sort of like moment where you already kind of get a feeling that something's off, maybe some sort of wrongdoing went on. Now, what's more important than the word he here is the comma after. The comma makes a pause right after these two words, ungratefully, creating a pause between it and the rest of the line. Now, this pause actually, after such a negatively connotated word, such as ungrateful, makes the reader judge this character already, who is he. Now, to add on to the disruption and the judgment that a reader may feel reading just these first two words, there's also words with negative connotations such as careless and decay. Now, this starts off the poem on kind of a bad, it definitely describes this first character of he, the guy on the walk. It describes him as a bad person, and this will be built upon in the rest of the poem. Now on to quatrain 2. All right, quatrain 2. Now, same as the first, I believe that the first couple words of this quatrain are the most important pertaining to the rest of the quatrain. They read, ah, melancholy emblem. These exclamation marks aren't the normal type you would see when trying to describe someone as excited or something as exciting. Rather, they're used with such grief, and that not just a period could describe the feeling that the narrator is feeling. Now, this actually, the first line, is contrasted with the rest of this quatrain here. You can see that there are longer syllables such as beauties and evening and green and thee. These longer syllables kind of create more of a upbeat and more happy feeling to this quatrain. Now, I believe that this is specifically because he is reflecting on how he has treated this metaphorical flower. We also see the personification blushing, which is something that a flower really can't do. I mean, they could, but now, on to quatrain 3. All right, third quatrain. Now, unlike the first two, I do not believe that the first couple of words are the most important of this quatrain. Rather, I feel like they get more important as we go on. Now, to start it off, the classic volta at line 9 of a Shakespearean sonnet, transferring the grief that we see in the first and continuing that grief on to this quatrain, leaving the happiness that could have, some sort of acceptance and happiness that could have been built up in the second quatrain, leaving that all behind and coming right back to grief. Now, this isn't just shown by words like withered and tomb and frail and deep sighing and sad, but rather it is also shown with dashes. These dashes sort of creating a disruption inside of the poem, kind of making the reader read it as they pile on top of each other, as each clause piles on top of the other, creating more and more of a sense of grief. Now, a couple things that stood out to me are the capitalization of these F's. Now, the second one was really easy to get. Sad flower. We saw this in the first quatrain. It's the flower. Now, I believe that the capitalizing F is personifying. It's turning that into a proper noun. It's turning flower into a proper noun, personifying the flower even more. And we guessed it in this first and second quatrain. The flower is a metaphor. Now, and of course, it's sad, like we've seen. Now, with this insight, and the insight of other poems doing the same, so I believe that fancy is actually personifying his own imagination, fancy meaning imagination. Now, I've seen this while reading the Rhyme of an Ancient Mariner with the storm and the sun. Now, this also is not just seen by the capitalized F, but rather it is also seen by this apostrophe, and there's another apostrophe at the end, it is signifying that there is speaking inside this story. I first believed that he was actually speaking to himself, maybe going a little bit crazy from the grief, but I believe that he is trying to make his own imagination a bystander and a sort of second witness, as I said, in his situation. We can see that by at my side, deep sighing, showing that his own imagination, of course, has the same deep grief that he has. Now, as we move on, Abra, I have no clue about who that is or what that could be referring to. I mean, Abra is the person. Last thing that stands out to me in this quatrain is this last line. Let's read it and see if anything seems off. I'm gonna count my fingers. Yeah. Like thine, sad flower, was that poor wanderer's pride. 12 syllables. 12 syllables, not the normal 10 found in a pentameter. He has a hexameter in this last line. This line can, at the end of the quatrain, could show an overflow of emotion that the narrator has over the sorrow and the grief, of course, as we've seen before, into the last couplet, which I'll get into now. Here's the ending couplet. Let's read this zinger together one more time. Oh, lost to love and truth, whose selfish joy tasted her vernal sweets, but tasted to destroy. Now this exclamation, not of happiness, of course, but just an exclamation, I believe, signifies sort of a finality in these last couple lines with the lost to love and truth, sort of bringing the poem to a close. One more thing that creates the grief, again, as we saw in the last line of the last quatrain: tasted her vernal sweets, but tasted to destroy. 12 syllables again, hexameter, showing again an overflow of emotion, more weight. It's echoing. It doesn't end like the poem is meant to end. It doesn't end with a pentameter, but rather it ends with a hexameter. Also, this last line flows so smoothly off the tongue that you know that it's the final line. We're gonna come back one more time, and we are going to review the whole poem one more time. All right, let's read this poem one more time together. I've underlined everything that I believe is the most important that I referenced in these analyzations. And by reading this one more time, I hope that we can all see the meaning that Coleridge creates, using this flower as a metaphor, using caesura, meter, and personification, turning this faded flower into a scene of grief and drama, illustrating not just that the imagination is there in your head, but it is actually a second witness to you and your grief and even in your happiness. Let's read it together. My favorite part after reading this poem and analyzing it is the twist of Fancy being a separate character from him, being beside him through this grief. It was confusing at first. I saw the apostrophes. I was like, is he going crazy from the grief? My assumption, of course, was proven wrong. And flower even was very easy to find. I knew flower was a metaphor from the start almost. I mean, the poem's named The Faded Flower. But I never would have thought at just a glance of this poem that Fancy would actually, just the word would be the most exhilarating thing in the whole poem for me, personally. Now, you guys have heard me talk enough already. I might read this a couple more times, but for the rest of you, peace out.